So today I'm going to present a new paper, a new manuscript that I have submitted together with my colleague, Professor Kevin Chrysiunas, who is working as an astronomy professor at Texas A&M and is part of these dark energy teams, searching for supernovae. So let's think about the state of science in UAP research, or the state of UAP research among scientists, rather. As scientists, we often have a very, very difficult landscape to navigate. There is basically very, very little open, transparent research quality data for UAPs because of the 70 years of stigma that we have had that has made it so difficult for scientists to judge or examine the phenomenon. And when it comes to all these thousands, tens of thousands, or even more of UAP reports, the problem is that when we look at UAP witness reports, the human sensors are uncalibrated. And so, as astronomers, usually we like to calibrate our sensors, like when we watch a star and try to estimate its brightness, we want to do things very, very carefully. Then there is this awful stigma that has been stopping scientists and astronomers for these past 70 years. Now, of course, it's becoming better. It's becoming much better than it was 10 years ago. But still, a recent study in Nature showed that 69% of faculty members at American universities will not touch the topic because they are afraid of ridicule. And that is too much. Then, beyond the stigma, there is also, of course, national security interest. And that's something nobody will tell you before, when you're an academic and you get interested in the topic. You usually have no idea about that. So let's think about the near-Earth stigma, like one of my colleagues nicely phrased. The thing that we have this complete field of technosignatures and searches for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, as we call it, which includes like searches for Dyson spheres, searches for satellite belts around other stars, searches for radio signals, all this stuff, technosignatures as we call them. It's okay to look far away, but it's not okay to look nearby, near the Earth. So that's why we call it the near-Earth stigma. And this, of course, influences anything related to searches for extraterrestrial probes or searches for UAPs, because you will have issues with getting things published because it's so sensitive. Many astronomy journals won't even touch the topic. You'll have limited acceptance in conferences, and you're going to have and there's a preprint server where all astronomers can put their papers. You can wait for weeks until your paper will just go up there. And also, it's going to affect collaborations because many people, even if they're interested, they feel too shy. Here's one example. So there was this astrobiology meeting this year that had technosignatures on the schedule. So Dyson spheres and SETI and all the stuff. However, I sent her an abstract describing my searches for extraterrestrial probes around the Earth, and I was told that the abstract was not relevant to the meeting. Anyway, something happened backstage and I got an invitation later, so I was very happy. I have still no idea what happened. Anyway, it was a good ending to the whole story. I didn't go in the end because it was too far for a poster. Here's another example. And this is a SETI symposium fully dedicated to technosignatures. And they say that the scope of the symposium, well, the scope of the symposium does not include UAPs. Well, they haven't changed their decision yet. I just find it quite a very good example of the so-called near-Earth stigma. Please look further away for the aliens. So, and this comes despite that astronomers have actually seen UAPs or UFOs for hundreds of years. Jacques Vallée has compiled a wonderful list of all examples that, or not all examples, but many examples of scientists and astronomers, what they have seen during the last hundreds of years. And here we see an example with a famous astronomer, Charles Messier, that saw like dark objects moving during a lunar eclipse. And it wasn't birds, and he was trying to figure out what it was, and we still don't know. So we have this example. Then there was a survey done in the 77 in the American Astronomical Society that showed that, yes, 62 out of 1,300 astronomers had indeed seen a UFO. But still, the most common argument I hear among my colleagues is, oh, if there were UFOs or flying saucers, our surveys and telescopes would have seen that. And since they don't, they cannot exist. So we see here by the survey that that argument is completely wrong. Here is another example. In 1956 until 1975 at Harvard University, there was a beautiful project that started, led by Fred Whipple, who happened to be a previous PhD student of another astronomer called Donald Menzel, some people might be familiar with. Anyway, Fred Whipple, together with Alan Hynek, they started a project called Operation Moonwatch. And they put out 12 telescope stations or observing stations around the world to track the first satellites that were launched. And of course, these observing stations were reporting back to Harvard with their sightings and things they've seen. And indeed, as Jacques Vallée uncovered, there were 36 UFO reports among these in the Operation Moonwatch. And again, we see astronomers have been seeing UFOs for a long time. So there's some disinformation also going in the field of astronomy due to the stigma. So, however, as astronomers, we like to be we like to have calibrated sensors, and we like to have very clear detection. So what is actually constituting an observation? Well, it's a clear and measurable detection. You should know where it happens on the sky, when it happens on the sky, under what conditions. Was it cloudy? Was it a full moon? Was there any other things that one needs to think about? Is the observation real? Because sometimes you can also have like camera, optics, and similar things that can affect. The problem when we think about UAPs is, of course, that you have unplanned sightings. And it's much nicer if one could see them with proper equipment for astronomers, because then you have control over the instrumentation. You can easier deduce what you see, rather than if you work with uncalibrated sensors like humans are. And today we'll, of course, also have another problem when it comes to reports that one can receive, and that is the deepfake risk. Because as astronomers, we are used to judge things on the sky, but we are not very good with distinguishing if someone would come to us with a fake video of a UFO. So we quite need our instruments to help us with this issue. So here, my colleague, Kevin, he's actually coming out here as a UFO witness. He was already for several years as a kid observing. He liked observing since he was a small child. And when he was 10 or 11, he actually saw something flying saucer-like, quite similar to the Chicago O'Hare sighting. And he describes it in the paper. We include his testimony for the UFO that he still to this day could not explain. And he has around 2,000 hours of observing as a professional astronomer, and he still doesn't know what did he see, and which is how he also got interested in the topic. I think it's amazing that now professional astronomers, including those that are so high level as Kevin, come out and they tell about the UFO sightings and are ready to do it in public. So we were thinking a lot with Kevin, so how can we facilitate the road for astronomers to study UFOs and UAPs? Well, one thing we were thinking about that there's usually a lot of troubles, like instrumentally, when one wants to survey the entire sky. Let's say many people, like this common argument, like I will take an example of a colleague of mine, he said something or wrote something in a newspaper that they have this famous Wiki transient facility, this wonderful telescope survey that stands in Mount Palomar. And if there were UFOs or flying saucers, they would have definitely seen them. Well, the first thing is that they are having telescopes that are big and professional. These telescopes are designed to watch things that are very faint and far away. Things that are very bright usually saturate the image and they get thrown away because people simply don't use these saturated images. So there goes that argument. And usually if you would like to survey the entire sky with such a telescope, you would have to spend a lot of time because the sky is quite big. So instead of using these big telescopes, if you want to search for UFOs, of course, the naked eye is the best. The naked eye or a small sensor, something that allows you to capture the entire sky at the entire time, and something where the dynamic range issues are not so prominent. So, for example, they use that for meteor research. However, meteor research has one thing that makes it very simple, and that is that meteor events are very predictable. You know, kind of more or less say when there will be meteors. I think the sound vanished. Did I? I think it's back on. Okay, so it's transient. So, going back to the meteor research and the transient UAP events, the UAP events are less predictable. And of course, now if you want to separate the streaks from airplanes, drones, military jets, birds, ducks, and all kind of things, you're going to have a lot of work. It's not that easy. So you have a so-called needle in the haystack problem when you are searching for UAPs in the atmosphere. However, we know that the militaries can do it because they have been working with these things for decades. They are actually the experts in looking for things that are unknown or artificial unknown objects that can be harmful for us. We astronomers, we are not really having that expertise. But what we are good at is usually searches outside the atmosphere, and that's where we can excel, and that is the parameter space that makes that astronomers certainly have dominated. So where I'm heading is that I think astronomers are going to have an easier time if they stay outside the atmosphere, and also it kind of reduces some of the national security concerns if one only looks for satellites and not every secret airplane that might be moving in the atmosphere. So that was one thing we were thinking about that could simplify the life. And we know that there's a lot of really good projects going on already research-wise. Like, for example, in France, they have the Sigma 2 Society, where they are doing very hypothesis-driven, very scientific studies of, or examinations of good case studies of UAPs. So I just want to highlight, because they do really nice work. And of course, we have already heard about the Galileo project, where they do these amazing surveys, and they've done very good scanning of the entire sky. And I'm not going to go back to it since you already heard about it. But there are really excellent UAP projects going on now when one searches also inside the atmosphere. I'm still I'm a person that likes to be a little lazy and minimize the number of false positives that I work with when I work with candidates. And we were talking a little bit more with my co-author, and another thing we noticed or have been thinking a lot about is that there is this UAP is now a very, very broad category. In many ways, it's what remains when you cannot explain something with natural phenomena or human-made phenomena or terrestrial in any way. So what remains is a so-called UAP. It's also a so-called dumping category. You throw in anything there that doesn't fit your expectation. It's all anomalies. But 70 years ago, one was talking very concretely about flying saucers. If I ask you to think about a flying saucer, most of you will have an exact image of how a flying saucer looks. If one tells someone on this, maybe not in this audience, but generally if you go and ask someone outside on the street how a UAP looks, they're going to have many different ideas of how that could be looking. It's much easier to imagine the flying saucer, but if it's easier to imagine it, it's also easier to construct an experiment where you can look for it and where you can look for it with calibrated, measured ways, and so that you really can design a careful experiment to see are there flying saucers or not. And so to try to elaborate on my thinking, when people work with witness reports, usually they use the so-called exclusion method. They see, okay, this is not an airplane, this is not a satellite, this is not a bird. And then at the end they arrive at something that they can't explain and they call it UAP. Then one can do a sky survey that is exploratory driven, like for example, we saw previously the Galileo project where you search for everything, you have a broad discovery, and it can be scientific when one applies this kind of, it's always scientific, but you can also have this hypothesis test that one applies on the data after the exploratory phase, which is very powerful ways of working with it. But one can also do very clear and targeted experiments where you are testing a hypothesis directly. Let's say, instead of searching the entire sky for everything and later applying exclusion method and seeing what remains, you can search directly for this, let's say the flying saucers or the triangles or the orbs, metallic or shiny or anything. And when you do that, when you work in a hypothesis-driven way, you're actually applying the most classical scientific method, where you gather some information and you build a hypothesis, you design an experiment specifically to test that hypothesis, and you do the test and you see whether you can reject your hypothesis or not, or if you have to modify it and you evaluate the results at the end. And this is something that kind of motivated also the paper writing, because many of the UAP studies aren't really following the hypothesis-driven method. And very often today I hear from my colleagues in the astronomy community saying things like, it's totally okay to study UAPs as long as you stay away from the aliens and you work agnostically. But what that means in practice is that one doesn't apply the scientific method. One goes either for doing sky surveys or witness reports, but one skips on this most elementary hypothesis-driven science. But hypothesis-driven science has been leading to, that is the basis of discoveries. Sure, there are discoveries also made in other ways by chance, serendipity. But if you look at, for example, the discovery of the acceleration of the expansion of the universe, that was a hypothesis-driven experiment. They were trying to see if the expansion of the universe was decelerating, but oppositely discovered that it was accelerating. When one found the first exoplanets, they were hypothesizing the existence of other planets. And they found, of course, other planets around other stars. Same with a supermassive black hole in the Milky Way. One had a hypothesis from beginning, one tested it, and one found it, this black hole. So I think that the UAP science needs to be redefined in order so that one can work with the hypothesis-driven methods rather than searching blindly and looking for whatever remains and call it a UAP. And one maybe even needs to rephrase the question entirely. Let's stop asking the most fundamental question that everyone is asking, what are UAPs? Because I think even the question like what are UAP or what is the origin of UAP is so extremely broad that we are at risk of not advancing our understanding, like it has been stalled for many years now. Let us instead ask much more specific questions that can be answered through hypothesis-driven science. First, do they cause an aerial or maritime hazard? We have heard that yes, but can we show that scientifically? Another very clear question that can be asked through hypothesis-driven science is, do UAP cause health damage? And the stuff that I'm interested in is to not even mention UAP, but directly ask, can we find artifacts of non-human intelligence? And I'm thinking, not only in space. Yes, it's nice to search in space. We can search also in the atmosphere, even if I just argued 5 minutes ago that we shouldn't. One can search underwater, like Tim Gallaudet was saying yesterday. This is an amazing, unexplored parameter space. But we can search also underground and underground. And even something that really would be needed at this time, it would be some kind of institute that organizes searches for non-human artifacts, ET probes, and everything in all these search domains, organizes them and conducts them in a way that is systematic. I think if we could do or manage to do something like this, it would be possible to really push the frontier of the topic and fast. Here's an example from Sweden, an example I'm always very excited about. So 2011, 2 divers, I think they were diving for champagne bottles in some in the ocean there outside the Swedish coast. They found an object that you can see here on a sonar image that was circular and also had many right angles and many things that looked artificial, as you can see on the left image. And they were very, very surprised because that object was something like 60 meters in diameter. And here you can see on the right side, it has like a wall molding, it has these right angles, it's a wall, and a lot of things that looked very, very artificial. And it seems to have been there before the Ice Age already. So it became a quite big thing. It's called the Baltic Sea anomaly. And in many ways, they thought that maybe this is a crashed spaceship, extraterrestrial spaceship, or maybe it is some kind of non-human artifact, some construction, or maybe even a construction from an ancient civilization. They were not sure, but they were just sure that this looks artificial. The object is further covered in burnt biological material, and we don't have volcanic activity there, which made it even more interesting. It was dismissed as a natural rock in Fox News by scientists who, they got a sample that wasn't from the rock itself, but was from the surroundings, and they told to the news that this is just an ordinary rock. However, there was no paper, no preprint, and there's no data to share. And the sample wasn't even from the object. And that thing remains very, very interesting. And as far as I understand, the divers also reported electronic malfunctions when they went there. When they went there, they were surrounded by these boats from NATO, Sweden, Russia, all watching them diving, and they were wondering, why are they all here watching us? And nobody has managed to, of course, retrieve this huge, huge construction or object, or whatever that is, natural or unnatural. But I think this is an example of the kind of objects one would need to study. We would need to study candidates for non-human artifacts and see if they are or not, in order to really progress the topic. For that reason, as a small hobby thing, also with the Ocean X team and with UAP Sweden and some people from the VASCO project, we created a small citizen science crash retrieval team. So we have this web page, and if anyone is aware of any interesting crash cases, just let us know. But we only actually work in Europe in order to stay within the European laws. And the goal is, of course, that we are hoping to inspire more citizen-driven crash retrieval teams to look into this so that we can actually get an answer. We don't need to wait for governments to release all the data if they don't want. Maybe we can actually try to find these cases and explore them ourselves dig up material, fish up material, and of course, once we have done the data gathering, maybe we can also send it to laboratories with scientists and collaborate to get definitive answers. So that's kind of the back idea we have. And my background, of course, is that I'm interested in looking for non-human artifacts in space. I'm extremely interested in the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And I think many of you, of course, are aware of that there are very good reasons to be interested in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, given how many stars we have just in the Milky Way. And we have something like between 9 to 40 billion of planets that look like the Earth just in our Milky Way, that are even residing within the habitable zone where you can have liquid water. And we have found the basic building blocks of life, like, let's say, amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. They have been found on meteorites and asteroids. But so far, one hasn't confirmed any life outside the Earth, not even microbial, even if we have all these fantastic preconditions. But further, as an astronomer, I also have to like Voyager and Pioneer probes. And we have our Voyager 1 has already left the solar system. So of course, now imagine if we can do this, also another civilization will be able to send out a lot of probes. That is the real reason to be interested in extraterrestrial probes. And I know the distances are vast, but surely if you can create a probe that can take care of itself a little bit, it will be able to reach another star even if it takes 100,000 years. And searches for ET probes is exactly what I've been working with for the last years through the VASCO project, where we have been looking for things that flash and produce transients, like fast flashes, just like satellites do as they orbit the Earth. And I've been working a lot with the photographic plates, and I think many of you are familiar with my work related to the transients, where we see some weird transients in pre-Sputnik images, like multiple of them that appear and vanish. They look like satellites or behave like satellites, except for that there were no human satellites then. And our best cases, by coincidence, fell on the 2 weekends of the Washington UFO flyover. So that has been something that really opened the eyes for me. Like, could it be so that we have detected UFOs? Now, let's think a little bit further about the idea of extraterrestrial probes. In fact, when one first started working with SETI, like Radio SETI, and Carl Sagan was involved, there were two lines one could follow. The first was using big radio telescopes, and the second was searching for probes. But using the big radio telescopes was already possible in the 60s, because the technique and technology was available. To search for probes in the 1960s was very difficult, because of one had photographic plates, we didn't have this, like today we have AI that can look through huge volume. One has, we can digitize all these images. We have CCDs. In those times they used photographic plates still. And it was simply not a simple thing to do. It was extremely difficult to do at that time. So Radio SETI is what won, and that got all this attention. But the ideas were already there. Like the idea of that one can have a probe, a Bracewell probe, something AI-driven that one could send to that another civilization could have sent to the Earth. Or von Neumann probes that are also like self-repairing and self-replicating. And Carl Sagan himself in 1963, before he became quite anti-UAP, he estimated that if such a probe, moreover, could be traveling at relativistic speeds, the Earth could have been visited something like 10,000 times by probes, many times. So even with the physics as we know today, this is a possibility for probes to visiting the Earth. And it's also the cheapest form, or one of the cheaper forms of communicating, rather than constructing huge lasers and pointing on another star. And one has further hypothesized that one could create like big galactic probe networks where you have millions of probes communicating with each other spread over the whole galaxy. And that is a quite fascinating idea, I think, that you would have all these probes to look for, and that our own solar system might be full of 10,000s of these probes that we could search for. And we don't even have to think about faster than light travel when we work with this. This is all possible with even the most accepted mainstream physics. So we were thinking a little bit further and came up with another concept. So we thought, how can we take the idea of probes to the next generation? And so here I introduce, this is the first time I presented in an audience, the Near interface probe. So imagine first, if we go back to the old idea, that you have an ancient galaxy-wide network of AI-driven probes all over the galaxy. So you have millions of them. They are repairing themselves, they are self-replicating, and these probes could also have, let's say, a component that allows human brain interaction. So today, I don't know, how many of you are familiar with Neuralink? Yeah, so one installs something in the head, and then you can communicate the probe with the brain. And here, the idea is that you could use the same thing, except for that instead of having some kind of chip or so, maybe a more advanced civilization would have discovered that a method to actually communicate between the brain and the probe. So can I just ask quickly, is there something wrong with the timer because it has been still? Okay, timed, great. Perfect, I will wrap up. So imagine now that you can go for this, you can have the probe communicating in that way, and you can transmit information between probe and human. You will be able to create quite a lot of interesting effects that apparently I don't have time to go through now. But the main importance is that what it brings, the main implications, is that you can, not only you can search for these probes in physical form, but you can actually look for, it's going to introduce perceptual different effects in witnesses, so that you can actually see something different. Each person is going to observe the event completely differently. And you can read my paper if you want to see all the implications we are doing from that. But the most important thing we say, just look for probes when you want to look for UFOs. And I will not have time to cover this very much, but that's the reason why we have the ExoProbe project, where we are creating this network of telescopes in New Mexico. We're starting there to look for things, typical signatures from probes, like fast flashes, and we're going to locate these transients, getting their distance, characterize them eventually, and bring them down. And we have finally our first telescope in place. It took 1 year to get it there. It's standing there in New Mexico, a plane wave. And it's working. It started working last week after a lot of hassle. And once we get that, we will be able to get the distances to the objects. We need one more telescope still for it at a different location. We will be looking outside the atmosphere, filtering away all the human-made satellites. And we are currently at the phase where we are trying to see how we can expand it further. And we are doing a call for collaborating telescopes. So, and by that, I'm done.